Well, first of all, this is the complete list. This is what I did when I was mayor of New York City. I put out as many tax proposals as I could think of. I put out 64 of them. I got 23 of them. So we'd have to see which ones we were able to pass and at what levels. And the way we would afford it is, first of all, we would cut spending on the civilian side. We do it through attrition. We do it through putting caps on agencies where they would have to get 5 and 10% savings. And also we would do it through increased revenues. When you consider some of these, particularly the more strategic of these tax cuts, these are tax cuts that are likely to produce more revenues. Cut the corporate income tax from 35 even to 30%, 25%. You're going to pick up more revenues. So that has to be factored into this as well.
You know, a lot of supply-siders down through the years, Arthur Laffer, Jack Kemp, and folks who taught me what little I know about the subject, they've always argued that the right prescription was lower the rates, flatten the rates, but broaden the base to make it more simple. You're going to keep the big deductions. You're going to keep the mortgage interest deduction. You're going to keep the state and local deduction. You're going to keep the charitable contribution deduction. It doesn't seem like you really wanted to pick and choose here. Is this a free lunch?
No, not at all. I mean, the reality is that you would get some savings on that, but people then would also have the option. Remember, we're not going to that as the only way of filing your return. That's an option. You can pick that as an option. So people would otherwise be filing the long form if they thought they could do better. So some people will file that form. They'll file that form maybe because they do better, maybe because it's just simpler. Other people will be filing the regular long form if they want to take advantage of the other deductions that exist. Medicare and Medicaid, the way to really deal with it is to bring down the cost of health care. And I think there's something in that tax proposal that's going to be very dramatic that's going to help bring down the cost of health insurance and health care, and that's the health care exemption of $15,000. If we can move millions of people into the private health care market, go from 17 million to 40, 50 million in the private health care market, I think we're going to see major reductions in the cost of health care. And that'll have an impact on Medicare, Medicaid. I mean, all of this is a function of health care vastly increasing in cost. And the only thing that will bring down that increase in cost is a private consumer market.
You know, in the New Hampshire voting exit polls on the Republican side, they asked whether cutting taxes was more important or deficit reduction. It turns out cutting taxes, 44%, deficit reduction, 54%. So I want to ask you, insofar as you're emphasizing a supply-side tax-cutting program, are you on the wrong track here? Do you think you're out of sync? Is it possible in the hangover from excess spending that Republicans in the elections in November 2006, that what they really want to see is a lot of spending and deficit cutting?
Well, I think you're going to see that also. But as you know, you have to cut the deficit in two ways. In one way, you cut expenses. The other way you cut a deficit is you increase revenues. If you try to cut it just from the point of view of expenses, you'll never get there. So you've got to do it on both sides of the ledger. And if you look at these tax cuts, corporate tax cuts, capital gains tax cuts, some of the others, these are tax cuts that are intended to stimulate an economy that needs, I think, some stimulation right now. So, I mean, the reality is I cut the income tax in New York City by, I think it was 24%. I was collecting 48% more revenues from the lower tax than from the higher tax. So there are times in which you cut expenses. There are times in which cutting taxes actually helps to cut a deficit.